Hi, we're back and we're ready to put all that technique into an actual drawing. In this lesson, you'll learn how to mix color to successfully match what you're drawing. You'll also learn underpainting, a technique that will help you get saturated color quickly. Also, we'll talk about burnishing, what it is and when to use it. We'll be starting with a drawing of cherries. They're luscious. We think of cherries as being bright red, but there's so much going on. I'm going to encourage you to draw the cherries yourself. They're basically just little spheres. Here's how I get started with prep work. I start with a gesture drawing that's just loose and light and lets me see the shape and arrangement of my subject. From there, I layer another piece of tracing paper to get a sketch. A sketch is just a preliminary drawing. After the sketch, another layer will help me decide on the lines I want to keep so I have an accurate, realistic portrayal of the cherries. And the last piece of prep, and almost the most important, is this. It's called a value study, and it places the highlights and darks so that I always have a guide to use when I translate to color. I don't want to be confused about what is just a darker red or a lighter red. I want to know where my shadows fall. Once I've got that all together, I have a good line drawing. I've provided this line drawing for you. And if you'd rather not draw, you just want to color, you can certainly use this. To transfer it to your good drawing paper, you just place the drawing paper over the line drawing, put it on a light box or a window, and you'll be able to see the drawing through. I suggest that you use a light gray colored pencil to lightly trace that line drawing. You're all set to work on color. Of course, we're going to make a color recipe card for our cherry. The advantage of this is I have all of the different colors that'll be on the cherry worked out well in advance of starting on my drawing paper. If you were painting a room, you would take the time to tape off the woodwork and to clean up the walls and fill in the holes, because if you don't, you end up with a messy painting job at the end. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're just getting ready. So let's take a look at our cherries and let me show you the colors I've worked out so far. Cherries have a lot of variation. In fact, my cherry on the left is more of an orange red. My cherry on the right is more of a violet red. So I'm going to work up a couple of different colors so that I know where to go with these cherries. I'll look first for the color that is most similar to the brightest part of the cherry. In this case, the color is 219. I can see it matching when I hold the point of the pencil near to the cherry. So let's start there. I'll add one layer of 219 first. And I'm thinking it's not quite orange enough. So I'm going to orange it up with a little bit of our color wheel orange. This is number 115. And I'm going to be sure to mark down the color numbers. I never want to forget what I used. This is a little bright for what I want, so I'll dull it and darken it a little bit with a nice dark red. Let's see what I get. This time I'll only color over half of my mix. I want to see if I'm getting to the right color. I like it so far, but I think I'll try something a little brighter too. A little bit more violet. I like both these colors. They're subtly different, and that's what makes realistic drawing realistic. We always want to remember to write down these color numbers. We're going to use them again, and it'll be really helpful if we know what they are. I almost forgot myself. The last thing we need to work out for our cherry is the shading color. Using just a darker version of red will take us only so far, but in the darkest shadows, it'll just create intensity rather than shadow colors. We're going to use a couple of different colors to work out a good shadow. I like a dark indigo. That's a green blue, so it has a little bit of the complement of the red, the green that is carried in that blue. Let me show you how this builds up. I don't need a lot of green to make a good shadow, but that little touch of complement will really help me with the darks. I don't want it to be quite that simple, so I'm going to add in a little bit of violet. Also a good shading color for a red because it supports the red. Violet, of course, is made of red and blue, so the red in the violet will support the red in the cherry. The green in the blue will provide a little bit of complement. I've made a little swatch of my shadow up here on this circle, and that shows you how nicely it blends in. At the moment, it looks a little as though it sits right on top of the cherry, so I'll show you how to make it sink in. I just add a little more of the body color, and the shadow becomes part of the cherry. We've got all our colors. Let's add them to our color recipe book, and then we're all set to start drawing our cherries. Before we draw the cherry, we need to look at one more spot, and that's the inside. When we're working with natural objects like our cherry, we want to see what color is inside the cherry because that's going to show through on the outside of the cherry. You can see that it's a lot more yellow on the interior. We'll use that information to create just one more color recipe. Seeing the yellow on the inside, I started with a nice bold yellow and then mixed my red right on top of it, but it was a little bit too bold. The cherry really doesn't look quite that fiery. So I decided to back down to a lighter yellow. That gave me just the look I want, red with a little bit of yellow coming through. So that's the combination I'll use. I like this start for my cherry, so that's my recipe. Let's get going. I'll want to keep my recipes handy so I can see them at all times. And I'll also want to keep this value study handy. I need to know where to place those lights and darks. I have traced off my cherry in a light gray. You'll notice it's a really light line because I don't want a coloring book look to the final result. I just want that gray line to kind of blend in. I know that I want this creamy color to start with, so that's what I'll lay down first. I'm staying out of the brightest highlight. This is just like the apple we did in the texture lesson, where the midtones come right up to the highlight in that shiny object. I'm laying down a little bit of yellow just in the middle. I won't really need it under the darks, but I want to see it through when I get to my reds. This is a great chance to use my solvent pen again. I'll always use this brush end. I have a little bit of red left on it, so I'm going to find a spot that won't matter and scribble off the color. As soon as it runs clear, I know I'm in the clear. I'll just blend that yellow in a little. If a little red wrote in on a red cherry, it would be fine. I'll need to let this dry before I draw on it again. And you can see by the sheen, it's a little bit wet. The next color that I've selected in my recipe is the bright red that belongs to the cherry. So I'll lay some of that down in a loose way just to start getting color onto the cherry. Here's a tip. This is a spherical object, so I'm going to keep my lines round to match the roundness of the cherry. I don't really want to draw across the cherry, which could flatten it out. I'll use another coat of solvent here to fill in the paper tooth and start a nice bright base for my reds that I'll be mixing on top. I'm taking care to be inside the lines. I'll have shadows going right up to the edges anyway, and we'll cover them up. I'm going to do this twice so that I get a nice rich base for my cherry. In this case, I've added one more layer on top, and I'll even give it one more. I'll start building some of my other reds now. And the first place I'm going to go is to mark in a few of my darks, following the pattern on my value study. I don't want to forget that this is round, And form is a really important aspect of drawing. Form being what gives something shape. I don't want it to be a flat cherry. I want it to actually appear 3D when I'm finished. I'm leaving the blending pen alone now, and now I'm back to just colored pencil. You can see that I'm drawing lightly, and I'm staying with that sort of circular pencil stroke. It'll all start to blend in as I move along. You'll notice that I've got all the pencils for this project separated from the ones in the cups. I don't want to accidentally pick up something that would make a mess. These are analogous colors, meaning mostly they sit in the range of reds. And it's going to start making a nice bright cherry for me. Every layer that I add seems to smooth out the cherry just a little bit. And I'm going to start toward the darks with darker reds. It won't be enough, but I can leave my shadow colors that I worked out on my card until toward the end. You can see that the cherry's starting to smooth out, and I'm starting to get that rich dark color that I want. I'm going to add a little bit of orange to this cherry just to highlight that brightest area that is toward the light. And I think now I'll start to glaze through some of those highlights that aren't directly facing the light and to work in toward a sharper highlight in that big hole that I left. I think it's time for some shadow colors. The ones that I picked were the dark blue-green and the violet, and I'm going to approach this carefully. My pencil stroke is still at about a 1 to 2 pressure. I'm just glazing in the darks rather than pressing them in heavily. I don't want this to turn into a flat cherry. And I want to see all those earlier colors seeping through. I'm staying here in the core shadow. That's the darkest part of the cherry, which is the part farthest away from the highlight. Leaving this little slice a little bit lighter, that's a reflected light that'll let us see around the cherry. Now I want to really turn this thing red. So with a slightly heavier pressure, about a 2.5, like my handwriting pressure, I'm going to actually red the cherry. So I'm going over everything that I've done, bringing a little bit more of that local color. Local color is just the color that the cherry is. I'm going to turn my paper a little because it's hard for me to get into this lower part of the cherry without crossing the line. I can draw better up to a line than guessing where it is. This will help me end up with better edges at the end. It's looking pretty good, but my shadow is a little strong. So I'm going to start working out of the shadow toward the light with darker reds. I'll start by going over the shadow. It'll seem like I'm making it even darker, but then I'll move that dark into this bigger red area. First with my darkest red, now with a slightly lighter one. I think I'll leave the cherry there for now and work a little bit on the stem. When we think of a cherry stem, we think it's green. And it's true that it has green in it, but it also has a big dark shadow on it. So let's start with the green. I chose a green that has a nice amount of yellow in it, rather than something that's a little bit too bright. I'll just glaze that on a little. The dark side is away from the light. I'm ignoring that little attachment at the base for now, as well as the little knob at the end. I just want to see if I can get a nice little cylinder out of that stem. I'm using an extended eyelash stroke. You'll remember that from our lesson about pencil strokes, where I'm just sweeping the pencil along there. At this end, I have a nice rough little connection. I'll get the shadows in first, and at the base, I can see some nice dark shadows where the stem connects. I'll use a slightly lighter brown up at the stem end to quickly add that texture and to finish toning the stem. Now our stem is in place, we need to polish up that cherry. We've got the color and shadows in place on our cherry, but it still looks just a little rough compared with the really shiny cherry in front of me. I'd like to show you another technique called burnishing. We're going to use a clear burnishing pencil, a white pencil, and our creamy pencil that we started with to get different effects on this one cherry. Burnishing uses friction to melt the binder of the pencil and smooth it all together to look like paint. We're going to start with the colorless blender. In small circular pencil strokes, I'm pressing hard now at about a 3.5 pressure, and I'm dragging that pigment into my highlight. You can see where I burnish, it starts to shine, and that's the effect that I'm looking for. The best time to do burnishing in your drawing is last. You don't want to use this technique that flattens the paper tooth before you're really ready to be finished. The advantage of the colorless blender is that it doesn't change the color, it only heightens it. I'm going to use the white pencil for a very specific purpose. I want to highlight that little reflected light at the edge of the cherry, and I want it to lighten a little bit. This is what you'd call a secondary highlight. The primary highlight or crest highlight is the one that faces the light source directly, and these little secondary lights, I have one at the edge of the cherry, I have one in this little rim area. Just bring that polish and light. I'm not going to use the white over everything, just where I want that effect. The last burnishing pencil I'll use is this cream color. I want to bring back that yellow we started with just a little bit, not in, but around the highlight. So a little bit of that yellow pencil will go a long way. You can hear the pencil points breaking. I'll have to sharpen them again, but other than that, no harm done. Now the last place that doesn't look shiny is the edges. Let me show you a couple of good tricks for capturing smooth edges. I'm going to use my original cherry color, and I'll work from within the subject. If I try to catch a good edge from this side, the pencil point is covering the edge, and I'll probably go outside the lines. So from within the subject, I will just work up to those edges and unite all my little fuzzy bits so that I have a nice smooth edge. I'm doing this with the red of the cherry because I don't want it to look like a line around, and you'll notice that I'm coloring back in from my edge. That keeps it all really tied together and puts that last bit of polish in place. Once I've got these techniques all finished, I'll end up with a pretty good looking cherry. I've drawn in the second one here, and I want to show you a couple of final finishing techniques so that I really feel like I've got a nice polished, finished cherry. I'm going to go back with my burnishing tool one more time, catch any little areas that need smoothing. A nice thing about colored pencil is that you can draw on a colored pencil piece anytime. You can draw on it for years if you want to. The medium never changes. You can pull it out of a frame and fix something that you don't like if it's been bugging you forever. So there we have it. A nice polished cherry. I want that highlight a little bit tighter. This is my tool for bringing a little bit more pigment into those highlights so they just glow. When your cherries are finished, you're going to be really happy with the result. For your homework, finish up your cherry and then draw the next one to keep it company. Use your first cherry as a template and make the second one even better. In our next lesson, I'll go over how to add a background to our cherry drawing to really complete the work.